Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the HuddleCamHD live show. We're in our pre-show podcast mode. And today we're talking about the SimpleTrack2, our most advanced auto tracking camera. I'm joined with my wonderful co-host, Tess Protesto, and our talented product engineer, Jeffrey Robinson. How are you guys doing today?
Good, Paul.
Good.
How are you?
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here, guys. This is we haven't done a podcast in a while on our HuddleCam HD channel, and I'm just super excited to talk about the SimpleTrack 2. This is our dual sensor auto tracking camera, and dual sensor auto tracking cameras are in many ways superior to single sensor auto tracking cameras. And I wanted to bring on our product engineer Jeffrey Robinson to kind of talk through some of the awesome features of this product podcast style. So we're here though live on YouTube.
On YouTube and Facebook. So make sure that you say hello in the chat and let us know where you're listening or watching from.
So you guys can ask questions too, but I have a few on our show notes here to get us through. And let me start off by asking you, Jeffrey, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and your role in the development of the SimpleTrack 2 product?
Yeah, sure. So I was on the team that designed and developed the SimpleTrack2, and I guess my specific contribution was was designing the preset zones, the preset zone triggers.
Yeah, and we're going to dig into those. It is sort of what makes the SimpleTrack 2 different from one of the reasons why it's different from a single sensor auto tracking camera. And that leads me to my next question, but I want to share my thoughts on what a single sensor camera, auto tracking camera is, and a dual sensor. And then you can kind of correct me and probably go a little deeper with all of your product knowledge. But for those of you out there who might think, oh, there's auto tracking cameras and not know that there's a difference between a single sensor auto tracking camera and a dual sensor auto tracking camera, the difference is this. A single sensor camera has a single camera lens, right? A single camera lens and a single sensor. That's where the word comes from. A dual sensor camera actually has two cameras in one body. And one camera on the SimpleTrack 2 is a reference camera. In fact, Tess, would you mind handing me that SimpleTrack 2 so I could show this off visually? So one of the cameras is a reference camera, and so that's right here. And this gives you a wide angle reference view of your space. And then the other is an optical zoom camera. Now, when you try to have a single sensor camera with a single optical lens, you have a much higher likelihood of losing the subject because it has to zoom in. It doesn't have the wide angle. So, Jeffrey, that's my understanding of kind of the high level differences between a single sensor and a dual sensor lens. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about kind of the driving forces behind why you are so passionate about developing the SimpleTrack 2 and what the benefits are here of that dual sensor platform.
Sure, Paul. I think you got it pretty much there. You can see when the shot's in on me and we're using a pan tilt zoom lens, it's very tight on me. So if Mike over in the studio was to pan or tilt away from me, the camera no longer has any understanding of where I am in the scene. What the dual sensor does is allows the camera to always know what's going on in the larger scene, and then it allows it to direct that PTZ lens to go to a specific area, so to follow a person or to go to a specific preset. But instead, unlike the single sensor camera, the dual sensor is constantly looking and surveying the whole scene, and that just gives you a lot more opportunities to do things in that scene instead of just relying on the camera following you and tracking.
Now we have today we're going to do a live demonstration of the dual sensor. And one of the cool things about a dual sensor camera is that reference camera allows you to kind of plot out your scene. And I'd like to ask you a little bit specifically about an educational environment. How would this perform in a classroom? And I would like to compare and contrast single sensor and dual sensor in this conversation, but let's talk specifically about a classroom and where that reference camera comes into play.
Yeah, so the dual sensor cameras are definitely really useful in the classroom environment. And I think you'll be showing it, as you said, showing a demo later that's going to demonstrate some of these features, but I'll try and talk about them. The preset zones that I spoke to earlier, we can use those to basically, instead of constantly following a subject, which can be very disorienting if you're trying to focus on something like a blackboard, we can actually freeze the camera to focus on that area. So that was one of the main drivers for creating the preset zone. Was a teacher is going to be walking back and forth in front of the class. Sometimes they're moving, sometimes they're not. But when they want you to focus on what they're writing on a whiteboard or a blackboard, you don't necessarily want that camera constantly trying to follow the teacher's head. So what we did is create these preset zones, which is we can set up specific areas of the scene, so a whiteboard or a blackboard, and we can say, hey, when the teacher's in front of that, don't move. Just focus right on that whiteboard or blackboard and allow the people to just watch the teacher writing. When the teacher wants the camera to follow, they leave the area of the blackboard and the camera resumes tracking. And this allows you, as Paul said, to start thinking about blocking and start thinking about how you're going to use the camera as automation in that environment.
And I actually have a screen here, Mike. I don't know if you want to pull that up on the live screen. We could talk through it to give a visual aid to our viewers online. But essentially, this is a really good feature for having a wide angle view of your classroom, and then setting up, specific instructions for when the teacher is at a whiteboard or blackboard. And I've got it. We're going to show it live today. So if we don't want to bring this up now, it's not a big deal. But I do have a view of it here, and I think that's a really good way of explaining it. A preset zone, essentially, you can draw borders on top of the reference camera. Let me make sure I'm setting this to Mike properly. And there we go. Okay, let me talk through this, what we're looking at here. So Tess was kind enough, thank you, Tess,
No problem.
to set this up early. And we've got a whiteboard, we've got a product demonstration area. And what we did is, on top of the wide angle reference camera, you have the ability to draw zones. And of course, we have a tracking zone, so we want the camera to automatically track the subject. But we also set up these preset zones, and you can, in the HuddleCamHD SimpleTrack software, you can draw these boxes specifically on areas in your location where the camera is, and then set up triggers. So you can see here we've got 3 preset zones set up for our demonstration today. And Jeffrey, why don't you tell us a little bit about what these preset zones can do?
Yeah, sure. So preset zone 1 is what we were just talking about. So that's the whiteboard scene. So when Tess went, and you can see we didn't draw it on the whole whiteboard. We actually drew it on the left side of the whiteboard, and Tess's hand is actually within that preset zone. And just occluding that preset zone, basically moving from the tracking zone and crossing that barrier into the preset zone, is enough to activate it. And so we don't want Tess to accidentally activate it while she wants the tracking to there. So we actually draw it, 2/3 into the screen, and she can activate it as soon as she actually wants to start writing on the screen. The next preset zone was on the podium with the mini track over there. We think the preset zones are pretty useful for product shots. So just like Tess's hand was able to activate preset zone 1 at the whiteboard, Tess's hand could also allow a very, very tight shot of that mini track camera and allow you to basically focus on the product instead of the lecturer. And that kind of automation doesn't exist with a lot of tracking cameras. Most of them just want to track you. They don't want to take that opportunity to get that really, really nice product shot. The third zone is another interesting way to use the camera. And that way we can actually expand the scene. And now I'm looking at Paul's thing, and I realized that the podium was preset 3, and now I'm talking about preset 2. So the preset 2 on the side of the screen really is going to allow us to expand that stage. And I think you'll really like the demo when it comes up. But basically, when Tess walks into that preset zone 2, that camera is going to pan over, and you can't see it in Paul's screen, but Paul's desk is actually just to the right of there. And so when Tess walks into that area, the camera is actually going to move over and display a corner of the room that you can't see from the reference camera. So we're actually using the preset zones to expand the useful range of both the PTZ lens and the reference camera. So we can see a much wider version of the room than even our wide angle reference lens can see.
And it doesn't have to be a face walking into those preset zones. It can be part of a body, like we mentioned, my hands.
Yeah, so motion is gonna activate them. So it's following you as a person, but if you as the tracked person create motion in front of there, then you're gonna call that preset zone.
It's a really cool use of the reference camera, because when we look at this, we see a reference camera. We have the ability to draw the tracking zones and blocking zones, which I think are equally important in some ways. So let me ask you about the blocking zones. So we talked about tracking zone. That's the zone in which you want the camera to track, right? You've got your preset zones, which allow you to do special things like at a whiteboard. You don't want it to be panning and tilting and zooming, which can be distracting. You just want it to frame a whiteboard presentation space perfectly. But what about blocking zones? Where are those useful? Because I saw those in the software.
Yeah, so blocking zones are something you used when you don't want the camera to identify a face. And the place these are most useful are reflective surfaces. So if you have a mirror, if you have a glass panel, if you have a very reflective wooden table, a face can sort of show up in that reflection, and that can trick the camera. So what we do is create blocking zones so that we can tell the camera, hey, if you see a face here, that's not something to track. So if you have we've seen very, very reflective conference room desks when people use tracking versions of framing versions of these cameras, and those can trick the camera. And so all you have to do is put in a preset zone. Camera's no longer tricked. You have a mirror in the scene. You have glass. You just draw the blocking zone over there. The camera's no longer tricked. So it's basically just a way to enhance the tracking capabilities of the camera.
So this camera, the SimpleTrack2, and there was a SimpleTrack1 even. I don't know if you remember that. There's a SimpleTrack1. Now we have a SimpleTrack2. And there was even a SimpleTrack Lite.
Mm-hmm.
So there's multiple varieties of the SimpleTrack family, and they're all able to be controlled and managed with this HuddleCamHD SimpleTrack software.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we take a minute to talk about the software? What is it capable of? I understand it's used to find the cameras on your network.
Yeah.
To manage them. Why don't we talk through some of the things it's capable of?
Yeah, so the software is sort of a all-in-one tool for both management and of all of your cameras in your fleet, as well as the single cameras that you want to set up for tracking. So there is a little bit of work that is required to set up a dual lens system, because basically, just like Paul showed you, you need to draw a green tracking box over the scene where you want the camera to track. You have to check if there are areas that you don't want the camera to track, and then you use those blocking zones. And then if you want to do some of those specialized like whiteboard scenes, like we saw tests in, then you would draw some preset zones. So there's a couple different panes in the software. The first pane is going to allow you to find all of your cameras on your network. These are network cameras, though they also have USB, HDMI, SDI. And I should say digital DVI, it's a different connector for HDMI, but it will work in your HDMI monitor. So you can find the cameras on the network, and then you can actually pull up both the reference lens and the PTZ lens to actually do the setup to get the camera ready to basically produce the scene for you.
Okay. Yeah, I've been using that software. And I noticed a couple things there too, that you didn't mention that I'll just touch on, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But the camera also has an SD card input, and you can start recording from that software.
Oh yeah. So the software does have built-in recording. You can put an SD card into the back of the camera, and then you can use it to actually record scenes. So sorry, I forgot that. Thanks, Paul.
Oh yeah, no problem. And then also, I think that you can also stream directly from the camera, but in order to do that, you manage that through the software as well if you want to stream to YouTube or something?
Oh yeah, yeah. If you want to stream to YouTube or Facebook or any RTMP CDN, then you can basically enter those URLs into the software, push a button, and you're on YouTube.
Speaking of the back of the camera, what are all the different output options that the SimpleTrack2 has?
So it has 3G SDI, USB, DVI digital. So that's just basically a different connector to get to your HDMI monitor, and IP.
There's a lot of different options there.
Yeah, that's good.
Tried to cover the bases.
Ashraf on YouTube is asking us a question. How do you handle audio? We use XLR. Can it be connected to the camera to keep lip sync in place?
So I'm just trying to think the audio. I believe the
The 3.5 millimeter input, I believe.
yeah, no, I'm just trying to think through a couple different cameras. 3.5 input, and the lip sync so if you let me just think through this. So lip sync is something where you're going to have to deal with the audio. If you use the NDI upgrade, which is available, that is going to basically timestamp your video and allow a much better sync in production between scenes. And we do find sometimes when people are, and you're not going to be able to plug an XLR mic directly into it. You might have to bring that into a different piece of hardware and then bring that into your production system. But we find that people, as long as they're dealing with their audio and their video, they can basically start syncing them by maybe slightly delaying the audio over the video. But I've also seen the other situation where the audio sometimes comes in faster than the video. So there's a number of situations to deal there, but we're not going to be able to directly deal with your XLR.
Now, regarding NDI, this camera is NDI upgradable.
Correct.
So how does the NDI upgrade process work?
So the NDI upgrade process, so you download the NDI suite of tools from NDI TV, I think is their new address. They may have changed it again. But so you download the NDI tools, open up NDI Studio Monitor, which is the way to view the NDI stream. And your camera out of the box is going to show, hey, you're not registered. You need to register your camera and license it for NDI. It'll take you to Storefront. You go and buy the license, you apply it to the camera, and the camera is then forever licensed for NDI. And then you can use the NDI stream to both view and control the camera.
And can you stream via RTSP as well?
Yes, RTSP is working on the camera.
Okay.
Both from the reference view and from the PTZ head.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the distance limitations that are out there. So there's a limitation on how far you can be away from the camera, obviously, for it to effectively track you, right?
Yeah, sure. We recommend about 50 feet of distance is about the maximum you want to push this camera. Obviously, the reference lens has to be able to identify a face or head and shoulders or a body. And as you get further back and away from the camera, the less that reference lens is going to be able to distinguish you. And because it is such a wide angle reference lens, it's not going to be able to deal with about more than 50 feet of depth. But 50 feet does cover a lot of scenarios.
So with that being said, then, that's somewhat of a limitation for dual sensor cameras that have a reference camera. So if you're less than 50 feet away from your presentation space, a dual sensor camera is going to give you superior performance, additional options that a single sensor camera will not have. If you're beyond 50 feet, single sensor cameras like the PTZ Optics Move 4K, for example, can track further, but maybe not quite as reliably with as much features.
If you're careful, you can get much further away with cameras like the PTZ Optics Move 4K, though you do run into some of the same issues, some similar but different issues with the Move 4K. So once you zoom into a point, so we were just talking about the advantage of the dual lens system is that when Mike is zoomed in on me, if I were to move over here, I'm going to quickly lose that single sensor camera. Well, it's going to be the same thing once you're doing a lot of zooming in to track somebody with a single sensor camera, is that if that person moves quickly, that camera has no ability to understand when that person moved off the scene, and it's going to lose you. So I would say there's equal challenges with trying to push distance with tracking cameras, whether it's dual or single sensor.
One of the things we noticed with the SimpleTrack2, and Mike, I don't know if you're prepared to show this or not, but I actually have it on this SimpleTrack2. There's one on my desk shooting me here, is that you really have a lot of granular control over the framing and composition of the auto tracking for the SimpleTrack2. So I noticed, you can control the zoom level, you can control the pan and tilt speeds, you can control whether or not it does an automatic zoom in and out.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might even be missing some, but there's a large number of tweaking and settings, sensitivity that you don't seem to get in a lot of the single sensor cameras.
Yeah, there's a lot of advanced parameters in the SimpleTrack2, and that's really when you really want to dial in. So yeah, you can change the pan, tilt, and zoom speeds and how quickly they're going to change. You can sort of say how aggressive you want the zoom to be. You can say, do you want the camera to sort of follow you outside of the limits of the reference camera? You can choose what's the actions that the camera is going to take when it loses a subject and how long it's going to decide before it loses a subject, which we call the timeout setting. Yeah, I would say there's probably for that large amount of features, I don't know a single sensor camera that offers that many parameters. I can say on the PTC Optics Move 4K, we're trying to create as many parameters as we can. But yeah, it's again, the dual sensor is a different beast as far as tracking. It is gonna give you a lot more opportunities to deal with the scene, and therefore you're gonna get different parameters to basically tune that camera.
Yeah, that was one of the big things I noticed in the software. And I asked Mike, I said, Mike, we really need to show this because it's really cool how you can say, I really want this thing to be really far zoomed in. And it actually does a great job. I don't know if this is the camera or if there's a different one that's on me right now because Mike has so many cameras in the studio. But
you're over there with the
yeah, I think it's this one. There's an auto tracking one, and it's interesting. Like if you watch like HBO or a talk show on television, there's a real cameraman, and that real cameraman does a very good job of ever so slightly making sure that the talent is centered. With the granularity and the parameters available in the SimpleTrack2, you really can get that true camera operator feel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's a different type of tracking than you see in a lot of the single sensors where, again, the single sensor, if it loses you, if you go to the right or left of where you are in the scene, it's going to have to reset itself.
Well, theoretically, it should try to track you.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the camera doesn't know what's outside of its view, whereas the dual lens really does understand it. And maybe that gives us an opportunity to just talk about another feature that we didn't talk about, which is the ability to set up both the stage and the talent view. So we can actually change what the zoom level is for the full stage view that we want to show. We can also say what is the zoom level that we want the talent to sort of be normally in. So do we want a very tight shot? Do we want a wide shot? And then what Paul was talking about, sort of emulating the camera operators, that's a pretty cool thing with these. So a lot of these single sensors are really going to try and keep you in the center again because they don't want to lose you to either side. The SimpleTrack2 is going, or SimpleTrack2, I may be talking about.
What are you
something,
talking about?
who knows? But the SimpleTrack2 is going to allow you to basically have a distance, and about a third of the way through the scene on either side, you can move before it's going to try and get you back to that center point.
We've got another question coming in on YouTube. What about dim lighting performance? Will the camera's tracking still work?
Ooh.
Yeah, the SimpleTrack2 is pretty competent in a low light environment. I would say we biased it towards low light versus high light, like an outdoor view, because these cameras are mostly used indoors. So yeah, we can sort of bias the sensor to give a little bit more performance in a low light environment, and I would say it's pretty competent in that environment.
Excellent.
Oh, here we go. I think Mike's showing my little tracking camera here. So for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see ever so slightly, if I move left or right, it's going to follow me. And Mike even really like turned the pan tilt down, the speed.
Sensitivity to
It's just, it really feels like there's a camera operator because it doesn't feel like, it feels like a real human camera operator as opposed to, something that's just trying to center you constantly, like a single sensor camera. So are we auto tracking camera snobs here? The single sensor's not good enough. We need the dual sensor. But I do think realistically for an education environment where you want it to perform, it's not just about tracking properly. It's about really making the content visible. You could have a single sensor auto tracking camera, which is for a live performance for a band. You're not reading words written on a whiteboard. But for an educational environment, it's hard to read something if it's moving left and right constantly.
Yep. Yeah. So I think, as you said, we've played with a variety of different types of tracking cameras. And I don't think there's a single camera that is the best tracking camera for every scenario. I really think the SimpleTrack2 is a superior camera in the education space and the lecture capture space, where the Move 4K might perform a lot better with fast moving subjects. The SimpleTrack is going to deal with when you're trying to just show a stage in lecture capture or the front of a classroom. So yeah, I don't think there is a single camera that is going to work in every scenario best. I think you have to identify where you want that camera operating and what's the best type of tracking technology to use in that area.
Yeah, that's well put. So just to summarize then, I just wanted to say that single sensor cameras are good for a limited amount of use cases, right? And especially when it's okay for it to be tracking left and right? A performance, a pastor walking up and down is not generally needing to stop at a whiteboard and write something down. So there are reasons why single sensor cameras, are good and they work and they exist for that reason. But single sensor cameras meet more demanding scenarios where, when you want the camera to stop and make it easy to focus on a whiteboard area, you can do so. In fact, I was at Case Western University in Cleveland, Ohio, and they have, I'm going to guess, like 20 plus SimpleTracks all around their campus. And there was a couple of reasons why they just were over the moon about what was going on. One is they were paying students to film the classes, and it was expensive, and they had to manage student employees, and it took time, and sometimes they didn't show up, and they were managing camcorders, and it was a pain for them. The other thing is that during the upgrade process to the SimpleTrack2, they went from like 720p to 1080p. And the HD, full HD opportunity, it made it much easier to read the words on the whiteboard. Then when they learned that when the new firmware came out, as you started working on these and added the preset zones, and they could stop the camera in certain scenarios to really focus on the whiteboard when needed, it just improved it that much more. So it keeps it engaging. It allows the camera to zoom in, follow the teacher. But when they get to that specific whiteboard that they know, and sometimes it's custom, right? And in Case Western University, they're lucky enough that most of the professors get their own classroom. It's not a shared space. Usually, like for each semester, they can set it up just for that specific teacher. And I feel like with the dual sensor and the customability, you can really make this work for the specific presenter, teacher, lecturer in a specific space better than any single sensor camera ever would.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head where the teacher is the camera operator. There is no need for another camera operator to be there to monitor the scene. And I think the other thing that we haven't touched on really is the other side of the preset zone. So we've talked about the ability to call those presets, hold a position until we want to move and have it track us again. The thing we haven't talked about is the triggers within the preset zone. So we don't only have the ability to call presets, but we also have the ability to send commands from the camera, which starts allowing you to do some really cool things. So when you enter a preset zone, you can actually have the camera send a TCP, UDP, or HTTP command to anything on your network. So one thing you can start thinking about is vmix that Mike used for production has a HTTP-based API. And you can actually start interacting with vmix through the automation of the camera. And so you start, as you start using that, you can start saying, well, I don't not just need a camera operator, but I can start replacing some of the simpler parts of the production, like switching scenes and things like that. So I think that's also a great thing just to know about these cameras is they do have this sort of automation ability within them.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this podcast today, Jeffrey. I know you're busy, so we'll let you go. Tess and I are going to continue on with the live demonstration, but it was such an engaging chat. Thank you for taking the time to do that with us.
Yeah, my pleasure, Paul.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jeff.
Jeffrey. Appreciate
And
it.
off he goes. We are about to start the live show in just a moment here, so hang tight, and we will see you soon.